Hey, what's up you guys? This is Steffi, aka In My Humble Opinion, and today it is not a typical Fan Reaction Friday video because there are no more new episodes of Feud to react to, which is really sad. So today, if you guys obviously watched last week's video, you know we're just going to be sort of doing a retrospective look back at the entire series of Feud. When thinking about how exactly am I gonna format talking about an entire series in one video, I was a bit like, I don't know how I'm gonna structurally format this, but then I was like, okay, what if I did this in the form of a countdown? So in the first part of this video, I'm going to be counting down my top 5 things that Feud was able to get right, the 4 unsung heroes of the show, my top 3 favorite episodes, 2 things that I felt Feud was able to accomplish, and my 1 big takeaway from the show. And as I go along doing the countdown, I'd be really interested to hear like what are your opinions on those various different categories. So just comment down below because I'd genuinely be interested to hear like what are your top 3 favorite episodes, or you know, stuff like that. And in the second part of this video, I'm going to be answering the questions that you guys asked me on social media, and then after that I will be done talking about Feud. Alright, here we go. So first, the top 5 things I thought Feud did right. So at number 5, I have the title sequence. First of all, having a title sequence in this day and age of TV I think is really rare, but I love that the creators of Feud saw a really great opportunity to make a really cool title sequence for the show. In terms of like stylistic choices, the style in which they chose to animate the title sequence really fit the time, and it's for me like one thing that just made this show extra special. If you guys are interested in learning more about the title sequence, I will be linking in the description box below a really cool BTS video that FX did with one of the people that actually worked on the title sequence, so definitely check that out. So at number 4, I have costumes and production design. Now I know those are 2 very different, distinct departments, but the reason why I'm lumping those 2 together is because the amount of research that both of those departments had to do in order to do their job well needs to be recognized. Like their attention to detail, especially in recreating the scenes for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or even iconic moments such as the Oscars episode, they did such a great job, and I genuinely hope that they get all the nominations and the wins that they deserve for this year's Emmys. At number 3, I have the shade, especially from Bette Davis's character, her one-liners, and Joan. Like this show has taught me anything about Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, it's that the 2 of them are like the queens of shade.
Define snub.
So at number 2, I have the choice of expanding this story into a mini-series. So if you guys didn't know, Ryan Murphy, who was the creator of the show, and actually Brad Pitt and his producing partner from Plan B, they actually optioned a movie script about the making of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon were attached to the script. But at the time, again, it was a movie script, so this story was basically condensed into just like 2 hours. And I think the choice to expand the story into a full 8 episodes in the format of a limited series was the right choice. When you want to choose like a specific event in history or talk about a specific point in a person's life, it's becoming commonplace now to take that story and really expand upon it in a limited series format. Like obviously Ryan Murphy did it with The People vs. O.J. Simpson, and that show, as we all know, was a huge success. So I feel like them deciding to not make their story into a movie, but to translate the story into a fully realized 8-episode miniseries was like the right thing to do. And at number 1, obviously the top thing I feel like Feud did right was casting / the performances. Whoever decided we're gonna choose Susan Sarandon for Bette Davis and Jessica Lange for Joan Crawford and all the rest of the characters, I feel like they did such a great job, and then the actors themselves did such a phenomenal job of really humanizing each person. The reason why the show is really successful in doing that is largely because of the actors. So the performances from everyone across the board was really great. For my top 4 unsung performances, because you know everyone always talks about Jessica Lange was amazing and Susan Sarandon is amazing, obviously because hello, we're here, but I want to talk specifically quickly about 4 other performances that kind of get overshadowed, reasonably so, by the 2 leading ladies of the series. So at number 4, I have Alfred Molina as Robert Aldrich. At number 3, I have Stanley Tucci as Jack Warner. At number 2, I have Allison Wright as Pauline Jameson. And at number 1, I have Jackie Hoffman as Mamacita. So specifically in regards to Alfred Molina and Stanley Tucci, I think those 2 actors are phenomenal character actors. And when it comes to Allison Wright, I've never heard of her. I've never seen her in anything, but she really caught my eye in this series. And Jackie Hoffman, I genuinely hope to God she gets a nomination. The chemistry that she had with Jessica Lange was so much fun to watch on screen. So now I'm going to talk about my top 3 favorite episodes of Feud. At number 3, I have the finale. I felt like it gave great closure to the story. It was so well intentioned and it was very sweet, and it was just a really beautiful send-off to all the characters and their story. For me, Jessica Lange's performance in the finale really just like shined. So at number 2, I have the Oscars episode. The Oscars episode for me was so much fun to watch. Just the way that they really dramatized the events of that night. Like, one iconic moment that I will never like get out of my head is that one long take following Joan Crawford from the stage all the way around to her waiting backstage and then accepting the award for Anne Bancroft. Oh, that was such an iconic moment. So at number 1, my favorite episode of the entire series was actually episode 3, and that is Mommy Dearest. I like that this episode specifically looked at the relationship that Bette Davis and Joan Crawford had with their children. I'm a sucker for stories about mothers and daughters, so maybe that's part of the reason why I really enjoyed this episode. This was the episode where we really saw sort of like the hijinks that ensued on set between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. And then it also has like those really heartbreaking, tug at your heartstrings moments, like when Joan Crawford tries to adopt, but she can't because she's too old. Those parts for me were just so devastating to watch, and overall I think that's just really why I really liked that particular episode, because it was a nice balance of fun but really like emotional at the same time. Moving on to the top 2 things I felt like the show was able to accomplish. So at number 2, I have introducing this era of Hollywood to a new, younger generation. I will raise my hand and say I am definitely guilty of having never watched a Joan Crawford movie before this. I only watched one Bette Davis movie, and it was All About Eve before this. I didn't really know much about these 2 ladies, and I don't really know much about old school Hollywood, but having this show sort of be kind of like my first real introduction into this world was such a treat for me, and it definitely made me want to go back and actually learn more about these women, watch their old movies, and just learn about old Hollywood in general. So at number 1 is the redemption story, specifically the redemption story of Joan Crawford. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford were really humanized throughout the entire series, but really, in hindsight of the entire series in general, I feel like this series really was such a redemptive story for Joan Crawford. I don't really know much about Mommy Dearest. I know that movie just really made Joan Crawford look like a totally bad mom, and I haven't seen it, but that movie really tarnished her reputation. But I'm just so happy that the series exists at least to help save the legacy of Joan Crawford if it was being tarnished by that movie. So one of my big takeaways from Feud is a sort of this combination really of the ageism and sexism that they talked about throughout the entire series, and it's the alienation of women as they age. Obviously in Feud, this is put into context in the entertainment industry, but I feel like as a whole, society really doesn't know what to do with elderly people in general, but really with elderly women. Moving forward, I definitely think we as a society at least are more open to having conversations about the mistreatment of women who reach a certain age in like any career, and I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. Hopefully, because a show like Feud is starting the conversation, it will lead to more steps being taken to better the issue. Alright, now to my favorite part of the video. I'm now going to be answering some of the questions that you guys asked me in last week's video. So if you hashtagged Feud Final Thoughts, I'm gonna be answering your questions right now. But first, I'm actually gonna be answering a question from someone who didn't hashtag Feud Final Thoughts, but I thought I would bring it up in this video. First question comes from James Monroe. James, you are freaking hilarious, but I thought I would just bring up your question for the sake of conversation. And you asked, what's your thoughts on the Joan-Christina drama? And also, what do you think about Bette? James told me that there's a Larry King interview with Christina, and he also told me that apparently Bette has her own YouTube channel. I haven't watched any of those things, by the way, James, but if you really want to know my thoughts about the complicated relationship that Bette Davis and Joan Crawford have with their children, I really don't know what to believe. I feel like my opinion would be biased if I'm just basing it on what I saw from Feud, because then I'd say their children are just full of shit. But then at the same token, it's like, I don't know, maybe there is some truth to what the children had to say about the way that their moms treated them. Maybe the children, to a certain extent, maybe didn't understand how difficult it was for Bette Davis and Joan Crawford to juggle being a mom as well as being a working mom. In the context of the time, I feel like maybe it was more common for women at that time to be stay-at-home moms, or if they were working, it would be a typical 9-to-5 job. And obviously, Joan Crawford and Bette Davis, they are not your typical moms. They are big Hollywood movie actresses, so I'm sure there were many times when they had to spend very long periods of time away from their children, and maybe their children were hurt because of that. You're free to believe whatever you want to believe when it comes to that issue, but I just don't know what to believe. So that's my answer. So the next question actually comes from Tumblr, which is really exciting because I love me some Tumblr. So Night is Bitter asked me on Tumblr, from about episode 7 of Feud onwards, I found some fan fiction for Bette and Joan, and I honestly think I ship it. Probably not the people themselves, but the way that Ryan Murphy, Jessica Lange, and Susan Sarandon portrayed them, etc. I was just wondering what your thoughts were there. Do you see it, or do you think there's too much rivalry there? Whew, all right. That is a really interesting question because I personally had no idea that fan fiction was being created, let alone existed, for Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. But of course, you know, believe it to Tumblr, God love them. So Night is Bitter, I actually tried looking on Tumblr to see if I could find some fan fiction. I didn't read any of them, but there are quite a few fan fiction posts about Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. My personal thoughts on fan fiction in regards to them is I think it's really cool if people are writing fan fiction about them in a friendship. I feel like the finale definitely alluded to like what a great friendship Bette Davis and Joan Crawford would have had. If people are writing fan fiction about like what a great friendship those two women would have had, I think that's beautiful. Now, in terms of them like shipping them in a romantic relationship, I don't know. Personally, I don't quite see it that way. You asked if there was too much rivalry there for that to actually be like a canon thing. I mean, hey, you know, that makes for some great material for fan fiction purposes. More power to you if you do. I personally don't see it, but if you personally see it, Night is Bitter, I 1000% support it. And the last question that we have is from Charlie Gregory. Charlie Gregory says, I like the dream sequence because it gave closure to the story without misrepresenting Bette and Joan as becoming friends. The one thing I did have a small problem with is I think the miniseries focused a little too much on Joan. My hashtag Feud Final Thoughts, thank you for using the hashtag, question is whether you should think Susan Sarandon should go into supporting for Emmy consideration. It's kind of ironic how Bette became the star of Baby Jane and got all the nominations, and for this it could be the other way around. Thanks for making these reactions. Well, thank you for watching, Charlie, and thank you for asking this sort of like award show centric question, because I do love award show talk. So actually, Charlie, something happened in between you asking this question and me filming this video. So when I originally first read your question, my answer would have been this. If Susan Sarandon wants to win, she should submit herself for Best Supporting, because you're totally right. This series as a whole, even though it's called Feud, Bette and Joan, I felt like this series really mainly focused more so on Joan. I think going in, people thought that because of Ryan Murphy's past with Bette Davis, he may have had a bias for her and we maybe would have seen more of her, but I feel like Joan Crawford maybe had a bit more of an interesting story in terms of like, you know, the story between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Susan Sarandon wants to win. It would be in her best interest to submit herself for Best Supporting, and Jessica Lange, if she wants to win, obviously she needs to submit herself for Best Lead Actress. But Charlie, a couple days after you asked me this question, I followed this account on Twitter called Award Show Watch. They actually released all the submissions that each of the networks submitted themselves for award show season. So for Feud, Bette and Joan, this is where they submitted themselves. So, to answer your question, Charlie, Susan Sarandon did not submit herself in the Best Supporting category. She submitted herself, or, you know, her people, submitted herself in the Best Lead Actress category. So, you know, that's okay. I get it. I understand it. It would have been weird for Susan Sarandon to submit herself in Supporting, even though she shares the title Feud, Bette and Joan. You know what I mean? So with that being said, I personally don't think she's gonna win in the category. I think Jessica Lange has a better chance of winning in the category. But do I think both of them are gonna get nominated? Oh, for sure, 1000%. So really quickly before I end the video, I just wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to anyone who has ever watched my videos, liked my videos, and also commented. I just wanted to give you guys a special shout out and thank you. And just in general, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been such an emotional 10-week ride. This show, this show was so good. Ryan Murphy really hit it out of the park with this one. All the people involved, they did such a great job. It was so much fun to watch over the past 10 weeks. And again, thank you guys so much for watching this show with me. I really feel like we were on this emotional ride together. I will definitely be reacting and reviewing season 2 of Feud. If you guys don't know, they're gonna actually be tackling Prince Charles and Princess Diana for second season of Feud. I don't know when that comes out, but when it does, you know I will be reacting and reviewing that season. So yeah, that's all I have for this video. This is it. This is the end of Feud. As always, everything I said was just my own personal thoughts and all in my humble opinion. I will see you guys on Wednesday with a brand new video and on Friday with 2 new Fan Reaction Friday videos. Bye guys!